What happens when a leading document management platform decides not just to digitize contracts, but to own the full quote-to-cash journey? Today's guest knows firsthand because he's building it. Philipp Pohlmann is Director of Product and GM at PandaDoc, where he scaled payments from incubation into one of the company's most strategic product pillars. PandaDoc, trusted by over 60,000 customers worldwide, acquired Philipp's fintech startup Denario to jumpstart this journey. In our conversation, we cover how to convince a document-first company to think like a fintech, design payment flows that feel invisible to users, navigate global payment providers, and why Philipp believes not every company should become a fintech. My name is Lars Markl, and this is the Embedded Finance Review podcast. Every 2 weeks, I'm interviewing the builders and shapers of embedded finance. And a quick reminder from my side, at Embedded Finance Review, I publish weekly newsletters, bi-weekly podcasts, host in-person and virtual industry events. You can find all of these on my website, embeddedfinancereview.com. In addition, I work with non-financial brands, infrastructure providers, and banks in understanding, designing, and launching the embedded finance products. If you're interested in working with me, visit my website and reach out. And now, let's dive in. Hey, Philipp, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today, and in what part of the world are you actually located right now?
Thank you, Lars. Thanks for having me. I'm based in Berlin. So in Germany, I'm speaking to you out of the co-working space here in Berlin.
So you're also enjoying, same as me, the beautiful Berlin August weather of a lot of rain, which I guess is very uncommon.
One of the best summers we ever had.
I like that statement. Philipp, let's dive in. You're working with PandaDocs. PandaDocs is a software as a service company that helps customers create proposals, contracts, including e-signatures, quotes, and a lot more. It's a quite, let's say, broad offering. Can you walk us a little bit through the origin of the company, what have happened in the last couple of years to this offering?
Yeah, certainly. So I think at PandaDoc, what we really try to do is focusing as an agreement platform, focusing on the deal cycle that a customer might have. So this can start from a CRM or from really having a lead to getting that lead to kind of sign a contract and then later on invoice or pay against that contract in a post-signature flow. But the origin of PandaDoc is really in sort of like helping customers to close deals faster. And I think that origin has really stayed with the company and now really evolved in this agreement platform that helps to make agreement workflows more transparent and really powering business transactions for small to medium-sized businesses.
It's quite interesting. I was actually, in my last job, actually a user of PandaDocs. So I actually like the way you phrase it, like the agreement platform and a service basically for parties to help to agree on something. Maybe can you share a few numbers at the moment? I mean, there might be people who know PandaDocs, but I think if you do a little bit of research, some might also be surprised how big PandaDoc really is. Maybe you can share a few insights.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the company was founded more than a decade ago. 2 founders. It's based in San Francisco. It has offices around the globe. It serves customers in practically all over the world. 60,000 plus customers as of now, ranges from very small businesses or almost freelance type of customers and 1 to 10 size customers to very large customers and even enterprise customers subscribe to PandaDoc now. So it has really scaled and evolved from something that has focused on very small or kind of less complex workflows for small businesses towards these more complex workflows and more evolved workflows for enterprise businesses. Yeah.
Sure. And maybe perhaps to make it, I think we can high level understand how the software works. Maybe you mentioned already you're working with freelancers, up to big, large enterprises. Maybe we can pick one of the customers, maybe somebody where it's say as the ideal user or the ideal customer of a PandaDoc, and maybe walk us a little bit through how they would use the software. I guess at the heart is a contract which is being signed by both parties, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit more how the user journey looks like for that person who perhaps is initiating this contract.
Totally. If it's a contract or sales-based workflow, sales-led workflow, I would say we definitely have a broad bandwidth of different sized customers. But if we pick a customer in the, 50 plus sized customer, then I would say that small business, obviously oftentimes led by an owner operator type person, would kind of go and use PandaDoc to maybe create a proposal directly in the platform. So they would be able to choose from a selection of templates, proposal templates, would then be able to configure this proposal, give it some price estimate with a table, and then send this off to their customer directly. You basically negotiate on this contract. And then as part of that, there would be lots of tools and functionality that PandaDoc offers, different integration points for the customer to connect, for example, their CRM that they're using, might be HubSpot or something similar, as well as different integration points now also in using different payment gateways such as Stripe or Square, or depending on the region of where they're operating. And then really kind of linking this into a consistent flow that would basically make this a great template and then convert it to a document that they could reuse for different customers that they might have, and trying to automate this workflow as much as they can. And PandaDoc would help along the way, either by as a self-serve tool where you just go, you explore the document editor as your canvas and you can figure all of this out on your own. Or there's obviously also a sales team and an account management team who would support you kind of configuring all of these different workflows depending on your need and depending on your use case.
Got it. And you did mention already as one type of integration, potentially payment providers. And obviously here in this Embedded Finance podcast, we want to talk about companies that have financial features. And as we, of course, we have seen as well, or we know PandaDoc is offering a payment functionality in the whole, let's call it like the value chain, right? I think you described it quite well already, where the potential journey might start with a proposal and then might go into a contract, a signing. And obviously at the end of this chain, at one point, maybe sooner or later, needs to be a payment functionality happened. And this is now something which PandaDoc has integrated. Can you maybe explain a little bit more around the origin of this payment product and how this fits in the overall customer journey?
Yeah, totally. I think that when you consider this a lead to cash or lead to deal closed workflow, then essentially you could basically split it into everything that happens prior to the signature of a document and everything that happens post the signature of the document. And that's basically how we've been thinking about that at PandaDoc. So kind of considering everything that is involved when it comes to this negotiation of the contract, making sure that we can actually turn a proposal into an agreed contract as part of the wider agreement, then making sure that contract actually can be collected. And when collecting this contract, you could think about like, first you need to bill against the contract, right? There might be different pricing rules and different configuration that you agreed on in your contract that we want the user to be able to collect that. And it could be that you just kind of, you could also use some sort of billing feature for that. But the big benefit of using PandaDoc end-to-end from lead to cash, basically from pre to post signature, is really not needing to leave the tool at any point in time, being able to just stay within your workflow and then hand over to, for example, a billing department or finance team when need be and when they want to kind of use a different system of record. But for our users, it's just very important to kind of have this linkage between, for example, a sales customer or a member of the team, which is part of the sales team, to a member of the team, which might be a part of the revenue operations team, and being sure that we can actually power the transaction more holistically or more end-to-end. And that's really where PandaDoc can be of tremendous value to customers, to link different parts of the workflow end-to-end. Yeah.
And if we drill a little bit deeper into the actual customer journey, I would imagine now let's say we had a proposal or the contract, it's signed, and now the person who is the provider of the service or the product now wants to start the payment or request a payment. This is something that the person basically triggers on their side. You mentioned already that might be a little bit configuration necessary, depending if it's specific tiered pricing, for example, and these kind of things. And then I think at the end of it, what probably would happen is my assumption, an email gets sent out to the client where the client then has the possibility to settle this payment through a payment method of their choice. Is that correct? Or how would the user journey look like?
Exactly. I think you covered it quite nicely. The quote or any sort of structured information about what has to be collected. This is the baseline or the foundation for actually the configuration that can be used with any kind of payment provider that can be connected to PandaDoc. And if we are using Stripe, for example, then you would still be able to configure based on the document, based on the contract that's right in front of you, you would still be able to configure, for example, a preset method like bank transfer or credit card. But you could also just reuse the settings that you have in your Stripe account for payment methods, for example. And then once you decided on the method and decided on specific payment schedule that follows this quote or that follows the structured input that you gave, then basically all that remains is basically the payment processor then kind of executing that request and following the billing logic and following the rules that you essentially set up. And it will just collect with the method that you wanted it to collect on the schedule that you predefined, with the pricing mode, such as different pricing models, with the pricing mode that you defined. And it would be able to do all of that very seamlessly, where basically you set up or configure these rules or give it these configurations within PandaDoc. And then off the back of this, it would create a subscription or it would create an invoice in Stripe, for example. Automatically, you would need to go into Stripe and manually create a subscription or trigger a subscription to start or create an invoice for a contract once you see that the contract got signed or something like that.
And you did mention Stripe now a few times. Is that let's say, your only or the main payment provider you use? And how does the coverage look like? I mean, you said already PandaDoc is headquartered in the US. You're, of course, based here in Berlin and Germany, set of global offices around the world. Is that a service that with Stripe you can do all over the world, or how does that look like?
Yeah, totally. I think that's a great question. I do think that we diversified quite a bit in terms of payment gateways that we onboard. We connect to 5 different partners for just the processor side of things. This is Stripe, Square, Authorize.net, PayPal, and QuickBooks. But at the same time, they provide different capability when it comes to offering different methods in different countries, offering different types of payments as well, offering billing capability. For example, Stripe billing has become bigger, at least in the US. And so we try to unify as much of this as we can. So creating one unified layer where basically the customer, if they decided to go for Authorize.net, they wouldn't need to switch to, say, Stripe to access certain capability. And that obviously only goes to so much extent, right? So we cannot change how many countries Stripe supports, for example. And we would kind of nudge the customer to use what is available in their country. Basically also brings us closer into embedded payments, which I guess we'll be speaking about a bit later in the podcast. But basically that's the big call out for whenever there is capability that does not exist in a certain region or for a specific customer is not able to maybe create a payment account with one of the providers. I would still want them to be able to collect payment on a document. So how do we actually accomplish that is one of the things that the team has been thinking about a lot recently.
Can you share a bit more, like how are you doing it then?
For sure. So one thing that you can definitely do, obviously, is kind of go with the bottom-up approach, working from a payment method, for example, that sort of like works universally, maybe with lots of different restrictions in different countries, like bank transfer. Or a credit card that kind of seems to work more or less well with different network providers that you could connect to. But one very simple one that we found very useful in the context of documents, specifically if documents have reached a certain value threshold, is bank transfer. So for customers who want to limit fees, they want to actually be able to collect a payment and do so in a way that is more or less seamless or more or less converts well. Bank transfer nowadays with the developments of real-time payments and kind of everything that we've seen on the open banking side in Europe, but also some progress that we've at least seen in the US. That's been something that we've seen being requested a lot by customers. It kind of followed that request and tried to see how we can build for the customer in terms of creating value, maybe offering this specific payment method as an embed and out of the box. And you would be onboarded, and behind the scenes, we onboard you still with a vendor, but like as a white label, but it becomes a much more embedded journey where maybe a specific document value would trigger such option to request with pay by bank or with the payment method, which is kind of universally available in different parts of the world and not really depending on what provider you might use external to PandaDoc.
And do you see like a difference in terms of like adoption between these like two different approaches? Is there, I mean, it might be a lot of factors going into that, right? I mean, it might be hard to specifically compare, but from your perspective, also with your responsibility of the company between these two approaches, what's your view on them? Like which one are you more excited about?
So what I would definitely say, without going too much into the detail of purely comparing adoption patterns, I would definitely call out that I'm much more excited about sort of an embedded view on things because it opens up a lot of doors for company like PandaDoc or a platform provider like PandaDoc to also have in financial products or to kind of evolve into a platform that powers financial workflows, not only document workflows or document-based workflows. So I think from that perspective, being able to offer a payment embed to customers as being a platform like PandaDoc, I think is quite powerful and just opens the gateway to kind of expand into different financial products. But it's a great entry point from like a single method to kind of evolve into offering financial products. And I think that's where I definitely would lean into being much more excited versus just third-party native integration, for example.
Makes sense. And you, Philipp, you joined PandaDoc actually through an acquisition of the startup you founded yourself a couple of years ago called Denario. And if I remember correctly, Denario was on the B2B payment space. It'll be quite interesting from a PandaDoc perspective, like how did the interest and the idea for payments arise? Like for me, from an outsider perspective, it sounds a little bit like PandaDoc bought Denario, and since then, basically, Philipp is with the former Denario technology building up the embedded payments solution and the overall payment offering. Is that correct? Or can you also maybe share a little bit of historical development of the payment product within PandaDoc?
Yeah, totally. I mean, first of all, at Denario, I think it is still a very important problem space. We try to fix pay and get paid or accounts payable and receivable on the same platform. And I think many have tried, many have failed to different sorts of attempts on this problem space. But I still think it's extremely valuable to think about business transactions because it puts you into this mindset of trying to understand how something that can be so easy or so simple on the customer side can be so complex and cumbersome on the business side. And I think for PandaDoc specifically, obviously the accounts payable side or the paying side, let's say, didn't resonate so well. It was much more about the get paid or the accounts receivable side, where it goes into invoicing flows and collecting payment on a document, which resonated much more strongly. But I think this idea of making transactions very seamless and from, if you now recall what I mentioned in the beginning of like powering transactions for businesses, I think that part resonated extremely well with the vision that the two founders of PandaDoc had. And I think that was a great starting point. We actually first built a POC in PandaDoc, and we actually introduced this during a sprint review or a demo call with the wider R&D team. I think it was so different in terms of how we as an early stage startup thought about a demo at that time versus how PandaDoc with a more evolved and mature R&D org thought about a sprint demo. But it did resonate well. And a few months later, we kind of became part of the PandaDoc team. I would say, though, that in the early days, it was very different from what it looks like today. So in the early days, this really focused on being an incubation. And as part of an incubation, trying cross-functionally to set up a team, and of course, being PandaDoc, but inside this team, having our own processes, having our own ways of working, still being very scrappy and being able to deliver very fast, having much, much less dependencies and much less things to worry about. I guess once we did see some scale of the solution that we came up with, we did kind of graduate from being an incubation into moving into the core offering and now working much more interdependently. That's what I would say. So our focus has shifted from just making sure like a point solution, just making sure someone can collect payment on a document, towards trying to understand how different workflows function and how we best can support as part of a wider customer value initiative, how we can actually support our customers in getting deals done faster. And that might kind of lead you to different places where in the beginning we just started on a plain document and now we are looking deeply into collecting quotes or collecting inside of the workflow or inside of the business process that is being pre-configured by an operations function. So it definitely has led us to expand in terms of our product scope and kind of expand also in terms of the team size and in terms of the product area focus of all.
I think it's really interesting how you described it, like how initially, I think the wording used like incubation, basically, like how this topic was initially something, maybe one of many ideas, some seeds throwing around, and then seeing like how this has developed since then. Would you say, like from your perspective, also in your role, was it a tough challenge convincing the wider organization of like adopting payments on that kind of scale, or was it rather easy in quotation mark because obviously you could build certain kind of MVPs and could demonstrate like very nicely that this is something which aligns with the PandaDoc vision quite nicely?
I would say back then, it's definitely been a huge challenge. And I think this is actually something that doesn't necessarily only apply to Denario in the context of PandaDoc. But more widely, I would argue that when you pitch embedded financial services, I would argue that you have to overcome this challenge of the company that wants to embed or the platform that wants to embed has to sort of start to think a bit like a financial service provider. It has to at least be open to becoming a fintech. Now, I think there is a myth, and we might be talking about this as well a bit later, but I would definitely say that it was a huge challenge to kind of overcome, given that maybe we as a company didn't have the expertise in-house. We didn't even think payments was not a first-class citizen, but like we thought more broadly, document-driven or process-driven about how could help our customers. And that thinking shifted a bit, and I'm very grateful for kind of like the teams also working on this initiative and working on the broader theme to kind of evolving and being more open towards financial services and productizing financial services as an embedded vision of that.
Yeah. And I think the describer is quite common for a lot of like non-financial brands, technology companies out there, where the first reaction very often that you hear is like, oh no, financial services, that's not really our turf. We don't know so much about it. And for some, maybe even it might be a little bit like, no, this is too sensitive and not really, we might not be able to convince our customer to trust us with financial services, right? And I think that's definitely a journey. And as you said, like, I like the statement that you said, like in a way, like, you at least have to consider becoming a fintech. I mean, maybe not every company will go down that path in such an extreme way, but at least it should be an option on the table to explore these kind of things and obviously understand what the benefits are for customers and also what the impact on the organization can have, right? Because there's obviously a massive potential as well. If you can maybe also describe a little bit, like you said already, of course, like we understood that the payment product is quite important, quite relevant. Can you give a bit more insight, like how's the team currently structured? Is like in PandaDoc, let's say like one team responsible for payments? Is that one of the, let's say, core activities right now of the company? Maybe a little bit like go a bit into detail of that.
Totally. I mean, we kind of evolved from being a payments team towards being several payments teams, as well as teams focused on quoting and invoicing. And the overall group of products has evolved to being a quote to cash offering rather than just a simple payment collection offering, if that makes sense. So it definitely has evolved and shaped over time. I would say it's still sort of like there's still so much more we can do, which definitely is kind of on the more exciting front, that there's so much opportunity that you could think of in terms of how this product area can shape in the future. I think that we will kind of go with where the customers lead us to. And this is sort of what we've been doing before. And I think that's where I would see it heading.
And you touched on a few points already, but like quite keen to still ask that question. You obviously have a fintech background. You've done you built your own fintech startup. Now you're maybe you can say like on the other side, on the B2B SaaS company that is becoming or is become in a way offering financial service, become a fintech company. Is there something you learned, something very specifically that you would highlight since leaving, let's say, the pure fintech space and being on the other side? Is there something that you would highlight?
Yeah, for sure. I think that goes a bit towards this myth that I have kind of become more aware of when sort of switching sides, is that obviously if you're working for a fintech, be that a bank or whatever company that is working exclusively in the financial services industry, you'll be thinking and breathing and building and financial products all day. This will be your bread and butter. Now I'm with a company that is much more deeply thinking about workflows and horizontal workflows. And embedding payments or embedding collection, for example, is just one step in a workflow. And so I think you just have to, or for me, I just had to change my mind frame in terms of like what is not only thinking about payments first, but more thinking about customer value first and understanding where you can better embed in the workflow of a customer. I think it's a very valuable learning, because you might be building a lot of features as a fintech that end up not being embedded in a workflow. And you might ask yourself, but why? Right? Like we built the best feature for, I don't know, buy now, pay later offering. Like, why is this not being widely adopted? And the reason I found, at least from my experience here at PandaDoc, is, well, one of the reasons is you might not fully understand the workflow and where these features could actually add value to the journey that your customer is on. And yeah, I think that's been very rewarding from that perspective.
And I guess it describes this whole mantra, right, of like embedded finance, or maybe here more specifically embedded payments. It's all about the jobs to be done, right? What you want to do is you want to achieve a goal. And in a way, payments is a necessary step of it, but it's probably not something you should start thinking about at the beginning and first have this, let's kind of say like, product tech geek kind of mindset. Let's build the most amazing payment feature ever be there. Rather understand, okay, what does the customer really need to achieve and what's for us right now the best way to achieve that, right? So think about the jobs to be done and solve that. And this doesn't necessarily always mean it's, let's say, the most fanciest financial product out there. Maybe sometimes it's even better if something that the customer knows already and has an expected like customer user journey and go through that.
Totally. Yeah.
And then just coming back to PandaDoc and the payment team within the company or the payment efforts, in a way, is there a KPI or a goal you're going towards when it comes to payments? Like, is there where you say like payments, we need to achieve a certain kind of number of the invoices or the volume that's going through the platform? Do you push that payment in the way that there needs to be a certain kind of adoption? Or is it rather, well, if our product makes sense and they use it and the customer are better with that, then we're doing it, but it's not like we're going to push and force customers to use it?
So I would answer this in two parts. First part is in terms of pushing customers into adoption. That's not necessarily what we do. I mean, the company is first and foremost a product company. So it is product-driven, product-led, self-serving customers who want to onboard, especially the smaller customers. It just wouldn't make sense to kind of handhold these customers given the scale of things. For larger customers, you might see our account teams actually approaching customers proactively and maybe suggesting some functionality to use. But for the broader base of customers, we are really a product-led company. And then what it comes with that, and that's the second piece, is we really had to be extremely good and diligent in how we measure and how we track our own analytics in terms of product usage. And we do apply that for the quote to cash domains, the same as we do for, I would say, across the company. And we really measure basically everything from every event click or every interaction that our customers have towards what we believe or what our assumption is the customer wants to achieve, which, as you pointed out, maybe is generating an invoice from a quote. And then we would measure how much the quote block, where they're basically creating the rules for this invoice to be created, how well that converts into an invoice, how well that converts into an automation that creates an invoice. And then we look at how many of these failed, how many of these actually succeeded, how many of these collected a payment with what method, and so on and so forth. But there's really like a broad spectrum of product metrics that we would measure. And as a leading indicator, as a leading metric, you'd want to drive adoption in our existing base and outside of the base, but really activation and adoption, given it's a feature set or it's basically tools that you can use as a PandaDoc customer. This makes the most sense for us to drive usability and adoption for these customers, given it's not an external payment platform or something like that.
Got it. And Philipp, you did share with your germs already, but maybe one final question from my side. If there's a listener out there who maybe is in a similar role as you were a couple of years ago when your journey started at PandaDoc, let's say a SaaS company, software as a service company, and just picking up maybe embedding financial services, embedded payment products, is there any additional advice apart from what you said already that you would give that person on the journey to make it maybe a little less challenging, a little bit easier?
Yeah, use PandaDoc. No, but like, besides that, that's an easy one. Besides that, I think if you're really thinking about embedding financial services, embedding finance, which I guess is the theme of the pod, I would question from first principles, right? What are you actually what's the problem space that you're trying to solve for? And what's the lowest amount of effort? What's the easiest path towards getting somewhere useful? And with useful, I mean valuable for your customers. And I think it's sort of like really kind of customer obsessed thinking, or customer grounded thinking. And I do think that there is lots of solutions out there outside of embedded finance, nothing against embedded finance. But I think one of the myths is that every company has to become a fintech. I wouldn't necessarily fully subscribe to that. I think that many problems can be solved more easily. And my view of the world is that essentially, if anything, fintech should kind of become more invisible and should become this infrastructure which is more easily used when needed. It's not necessary for you to always be the owner of that, if that makes sense. So I would say like really starting from where the pain is most visible, and then kind of slowly in increments working your way up to the point where it might be an inflection or a decision point where you say, okay, I definitely need to embed this. And I think that's broadly speaking, the journey that we've been on with PandaDoc over the years now.
Super interesting. Thanks for sharing. And I do agree with you. I don't think, even though on this Embedded Finance podcast and my newsletter, obviously try to educate every company about the potentials about embedded finance, I agree with you that no company should be doing embedded finance just for the sake of it or just because it's a hot and fancy topic. At the end of it is understanding customer needs and how to solve them. Maybe arguably there are a lot of areas where embedded finance can be one of the things, but every company also has to decide if that's one to focus on, or maybe in some cases also a little bit later down the road and not right now. But the value should be there for customers and for the company for sure.
100%.
Thank you, Philipp. I think there were so many more topics where we could have gone a lot deeper. Very interesting. Thanks for sharing all your insights. Maybe we do have to record another one to pick one topic to go a little bit deeper, but we can do that another time. For now, thank you for joining. And if there's somebody out there who wants to get in touch with you, wants to learn a little bit more about PandaDoc, is there a way to get in touch with you?
Totally. First of all, thanks so much for having me on the pod. Definitely very much enjoyed this one and hope we have the chance to catch up again, as you mentioned. And if you want to get in touch with me, speak to Lars. No, I guess you can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter /X, and we can take it from there.
I will make sure to put your LinkedIn profile in the show notes, and then maybe somebody who wants to learn a little bit more about your journey can reach out to you. So again, thanks, Philipp, for joining, and until next time.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you like these insights, make sure to follow my podcast and subscribe to my newsletter. And may I ask you for a favor? Please rate my podcast with 5 stars on your podcasting app. The podcast is free, but I really need your support to continue. Thank you so much, and until next time.